Part 2. The language of bones. Anthropologists measure her skull, test for toxins in her hair, try to trace her lineage, but they don't listen to what her bones are saying. All they find is deficiency and disease. No one wants to hear that our ancestors communed with the earth, so we become its silent witnesses instead. And what are we to make of this woman's legacy? How do we read the language of her bones? We come upon her story not through her name, but through the hole in the ground. And what meaning can we make of this emptiness, of this void? Emptiness is what remains when the clay is brought to rest, when the ritual is done, the hollowness where the spirit used to be. The anthropologists don't know what to do with this, so they ignore it. They can't see that emptiness, too, is a message. They can't hear that every culture has an emptiness ceremony, a way to receive and release, to give thanks and say goodbye. They don't know that this woman didn't just consume the earth, she became it. She was never separate from the land, only lent to it for a time. They can't understand how, even in death, her body returns to that same black valley, how her bones sift down into the dirt, how her essence mingles with the river's flow. They cannot fathom the thought that she would rather be empty than whole, that the absence of self is the purest offering one can bring to the earth. So they cart her away in pieces, severing the connection, assuming there was nothing there to sever. They think they're discovering her origins, but they don't realize that in doing so, they're contaminating her history, that in their sterile labs they're turning her into a spectacle, stripping her of everything that made her who she was. They want to know what she looked like, but they don't care how she looked inside. They talk about her diet, but they don't want to eat with her. They describe the landscape around her burial, but they don't want to walk that land themselves. They have reduced a human life to a set of data points, and in doing so, have forgotten what it means to be human. And what does it mean to be human? If not to have an ongoing conversation with the earth, a dialogue across lifetimes and landscapes, a communion with something greater than ourselves, something we will never truly understand, but that called to her and called to us nonetheless, even if we pretend that it didn't, even if we pretend that we don't. That primal urge to taste the dust, to commune with the core, to feel the energy of the world coursing through our veins. That's what connects us to her, to that woman in the Black Valley. That's what turns a handful of dirt into communion. That's what makes the emptiness ceremony necessary, beautiful, terrifying, transcendent. To consume the earth is to become part of something eternal, to acknowledge that we are not here by accident, that we do not stand apart from the world, that we belong to the earth and the earth belongs to us. It's a homecoming, a celebration, a recognition of belonging. It is the oldest story we have ever told. It is the story of you and me. It is the story of us. This is part 2 of a 2-part episode. If you haven't listened to part 1, go back and listen to it now. Her remains were found curled beneath a collapsed shrine Hofst in Hafrut, its roof, long eaten by moss, its columns leaning as if burdened by secrets too heavy to carry. No inscription, no relic. Just her, and a shallow bowl of earth hardened into fossil. At first they thought it was an accidental lost villager who took shelter and never left. But her hands were posed too neatly, her lips still pressed together as if sealing a vow. Someone had prepared her for something, or perhaps she had prepared herself. The woman, unnamed, unearthed in silence, became known to the researchers as subject for 7b, but to the few who understood the symbols etched beneath her resting place, she was remembered as she who swallowed the mountain. According to oral fragments collected from the last speakers of a fading dialect in the Carpathians, there was once a sect of solitary women, no temples, no priests, who believed that the human body was a temporary vessel for the burdens of others. They called themselves the vessels of soil. Their task was to absorb, to carry, to cleanse, not through prayer, not through flame, but by consuming the earth. They believed they could draw the spiritual residue of generations past and dissolve it within themselves. And so, in silence they ate. Not any earth would do. Only certain layers where the rain had not touched in decades, where roots grew blind and pale, untouched by sun or seed. They sought clay heavy with iron and ash, soil rich in what they called the memory of the mountain, a spiritual sediment formed where landslides had buried memories, where lightning had struck the same hill for centuries. To them, this wasn't dirt. It was a sacred residue of the world's forgotten agony. She had eaten enough to wear her teeth down to translucent nubs. She had eaten until the lining of her stomach bore trace minerals not found within 100 miles. But the most unsettling discovery came not from the body, but the bowl beside her. It was carved not from stone or wood, but from compressed earth molded by hand, fired without flame. A vessel made of what she consumed, and on its rim, nearly lost to time, a single word, Azrael. No one knows what it means, but according to a field note later archived without commentary, the same word was found etched into the inside of her ribs by some act no one could explain. How does a word appear where no tool could have reached? And more haunting still, why did it match a symbol found on the wall of a cave 600 kilometers away, where the same soil had been consumed and another form had once curled in the same final position? 2 women, 2 sites, the same silence, and the same earth inside them. So the question deepens, not just why they did it, but what called them to do it. because if their actions were irrational, it was an irrationality coordinated across generations and distances, and irrationality does not echo in stone. Faith does. When archaeologists uncovered the second woman, they did not find a bowl, only the residue of ash and bone. Yet the same word was inscribed on the cave wall nearby. This time, the researchers found a tool, a hammer made of polished riverstone. Between these two sites, across 6 centuries, all connection to the outside world severed, they found the same ritual, the same consumption, the same faith. What did the vessels of soil believe they were consuming? What did they hope to dissolve within themselves? And what terrible echoes of humanity did they hope to cleanse from the world? And if their task was to bear the burden of others, who were the burdens of the vessels of soil? In 1965, a team of researchers descended into the belly of the mountain. Their instruments detected a cavity filled with water, sealed at the top by a rock so heavy it would have crushed lesser men. As they drilled into its surface, the water level rose in their shaft, and when they finally broke through, they discovered a cavern so vast it echoed with sound for days. Within its walls were markings consistent with those found on the bodies below, and at its center was a structure built from the same unidentifiable clay. But as the sun dipped below the horizon, the explorers saw that the walls were not bare. Etched into the slick surface were countless figures, all bearing the same word that had haunted the skeletons below, Azrael. As they counted, the numbers climbed, but it wasn't long before they realized that every hand, every mouth, every eye was different. Each figure was unique, yet none were complete. Some were barely etched in time to be deciphered. Others were interrupted as if the artist had been driven mad, carving relentlessly, but never finishing. There were children, there were lovers, there were mothers cradling infants to their chests. Some were weeping, some laughing, some posed as if frozen in mid-stride, as if forever running from or towards something unseen. But as the researchers stared into the darkness, mapping the etchings, they saw that all were incomplete, all were fractured, all save one. In the center of the cavern, surrounded by the residue of countless lives, was a single figure. It was detailed, serene, its limbs whole, its eyes complete, its mouth curved in a silent song. It was the only figure that seemed to understand the darkness of the cavern, and the explorers felt a chill as they recognized the pose, the lips pressed together, hands folded neatly upon her lap. It was the same posture of the 2 women found below, 6 centuries apart, each holding the same secrets, each knowing the same name, the only sound echoing in the empty chamber. It was the whisper of wind through the cracks in the walls, and it carried the word Azrael. This is a story about forgetting. I know that sounds weird because stories are usually about remembering. We remember heroes, villains, battles, lovers, but sometimes the best way to understand the people in our past is to look at what they tried to forget. What did they bury deep inside themselves or deep inside the earth? What did they try to cover up, pretend never happened? And why? In part 1, we met Marius, a man who wanted to destroy every trace of his mother. He built an elaborate trap to kill her and then tried to erase any evidence he'd ever existed. But the earth fought him on that. His bones were found under the floorboards, in the very place he tried to hide them. And the villagers, when they heard his story, responded with pity, not fear. Why? Because they saw in his actions the same sorrows and angers that they themselves had buried long ago. Marius was not unique. He was merely a vessel like them, full of echoes and half-remembered cries. Now in part 2, we meet Saint Amaranth. You may remember her from my short story, The Last Oracle. She hid away her memories to protect them, convinced that only she could safeguard the secrets of the cosmos. So she walled them up inside her own mind, sealing away the knowledge and pain of entire civilizations. She became an island fortress of memories in a world that didn't deserve them. But here's the thing, Amaranth was only human. She could feel the weight of a secret, sure, but the earth carries many more burdens than any one person. And Amaranth discovered something she didn't expect. Even sealed away, even locked tight, the earth still bleeds. Rivers of oil, seas of plastic, sky filled with metals, her own veins ran black with the poisons she had forgotten. But there is another way. We don't need to ignore the soil or build shrines to escape it. In the archives of a crumbling monastery, nestled in the southern cliffs of what was once known as Thracia, a scroll was found fragile, soot-stained, barely legible. It had been tucked behind a full spine of a hymn book, as if the scribe who wrote it feared it would one day be found, yet could not bear for it to be lost entirely. The parchment described no saints, no wars, no rulers, only the movements of nameless figures who walked into forests and were never seen again. It told of a line of women who ate the earth to keep the world from unraveling. They were not martyrs, they were not holy. They were absorbers, vessels for memory, carriers of sorrow, filters through which pain passed and vanished. Their task was not to teach, not to preach, but to endure, to disappear into the mouth of the earth one spoonful at a time. They believed the soil remembered everything, the anguish of forgotten creatures, the grief of trees cut before blooming. And by consuming this earth, they believed they could draw that sorrow into themselves and keep it from spreading further. This scroll, signed only with the glyph of a curled root, named one woman in particular Lyra of the Ashvale. She was said to have walked 1,000 miles barefoot, guided by a dream that led her to a place where the soil turned red after rainfall, and the birds did not sing. She fasted for 7 days. Then, at dawn on the 8th, she began to dig not with tools, but with her hands until her fingers trembled and cracked like bark. And there, in the center of the clearing, she found a vein of dense, bitter clay. She did not wash it. She did not cook it. She simply knelt, scooped it up, and began to eat. Witnesses of the scroll can be trusted claimed. Her body trembled, but her face remained still. No pain, no protest, only tears. For 13 days, she consumed nothing but that soil. On the 14th, she walked into a cave and sealed herself inside. When others found the place years later, the entrance had been closed with stones fused by some unknown pressure. Inside, no remains, just dust, and on the walls, arranged in spirals, fingerprints pressed into the stone. Hundreds of them teeny whorls and ridges, as if dozens of women had left their mark. But here's the most unsettling detail. The prints matched no living population. They were human but not modern, not recent. Some bore patterns found only in Paleolithic remains, people from before writing, before cities, before the world we recognize. How could that be? Unless, of course, what Lyra consumed was not just soil but time. And through her, all those ancient wordless sufferings found a voice, not in speech, not in scripture, but in the quiet act of becoming one with the earth. The soil changed her, and through her it remembered. Which raises the most dangerous question yet. If the earth contains all memory, what happens when it begins to speak back? It is common knowledge that the earth has memory. Memory of ice ages and supervolcanoes, of coral reefs and coal seams, of creatures that walked and flew and swam before any of us were here. Even the dust we inhabit daily was here before our species, preserving the mummified skin cells of generations past. We live surrounded by ghosts, our own ghosts, the ghosts of those whose blood ran through our veins, whose hearts once beat time with ours. What purpose does memory like this serve? Is it anything more than the trace of an extinguished flame? Can the dead really speak to us through the cold embrace of loam, or are we merely shadows, forever barred from the solace of our ancestors? What if instead, somehow, they are reaching back, trying to tell us something? Our story begins in the Anatolian Basin, modern-day Turkey, sometime before written history. We know little of these people except what they left behind. Their language unrecorded, their likeness confined to the clay tablets they used for divination, showing only hands and faces partially obscured by the diviner's seal. Their cities, though, those remain, perched on the tops of mountains overlooking valleys that cradled their flocks. These were the Nazca people, and life was good. Plenty of sheep, many villages, and a landscape so benign it seemed sculpted by benevolent hands. So when fissures split the earth and swallowed whole homesteads, when great gullies formed overnight, draining fertile fields into lifeless pits, when the soil regurgitated bones picked clean by scavengers, fear took root. The Nazca, like many cultures after them, saw spirits in the land. They called it silt and shadow. Farmers heard it in the rustle beneath their plows. Miners swore the tunnels sighed when left alone. Wanderers, before they were taught better, would press clumps of river mud to their ears and smile as though spoken to. By then, it was no longer isolated. From the Anatolian Basin to the peat bogs of the north, reports emerged of women, always women, wandering into sinkholes. Ancient quarries, riverbeds long abandoned. They arrived with empty hands and left with pockets lined with earth. Some returned quiet eyes hollowed by unseen things. Others vanished entirely, leaving behind strange marks in the soil, spirals, handprints, teeth. One account, dismissed as folklore, told of a woman in dark robes who stood at the center of a salt flat and sang until the ground cracked beneath her. The soil beneath her feet, it said, turned glassy like it had been watching her all along, and finally blinked. The whispers grew bolder. Audio anomalies recorded by paleogeologists picking up low-frequency murmurs where seismic activity was absent. Sonograms revealing shapes that should not form naturally, faces, or fragments of them, indistinguishable from dreams. One analyst claimed she saw her mother's mouth in a chunk of ochre before it crumbled, but perhaps the most haunting account came in a letter, handwritten, unsigned, sent to an archive with no return address. The letter described a gathering, no torches, no songs, just a dozen women in cloaks of stitched moss, kneeling in the shallows of a lake that hadn't appeared on any map for decades. In silence, they withdrew a handful of mud, mixed it with ashes carried in lockets, and consumed it together. A communion, not of the body, but of sorrow. These stories, collected over a span of thousands of years, hint at an unsettling truth. The earth has a way of speaking to those who listen, of whispering truths that lie dormant beneath our feet. The Nazca called it silt and shadow, but its voice echoes in other tongues too. The Inuit have their Iglulik, the Dutch, their Kabarders, and the Australian Aboriginals, the Bunyip. Each culture's lore contains echoes of the same primordial fears, the land's insatiable hunger, its sudden lurching silences, its uncanny habit of swallowing whole those who ventured too near. Yet there is another way to hear the earth's whispers, not as a litany of loss and longing, but as a message. She is telling us that we are not alone, that we are always held, that even in the deepest chasms, the roots of life persist. All we have to do is listen. And that's the end of part 4. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey through the depths of our planet's mysteries. If you've enjoyed this installment and want to continue exploring the fascinating world of caves, be sure to stay tuned for more updates. Also, please don't forget to share your thoughts in the comments below. What are your thoughts on the story? Do you have any similar tales from your own culture, or have you explored any of these places yourself? Your comments inspire me and help me to create even more amazing stories for you. Once again, thank you for joining me on this adventure. Until next time, may your own journey through life be filled with wonder and discovery. Welcome to this special 5-part series. We hope you enjoy this collection of uncanny tales from around the globe. Part 5. To become Earth again, the final story does not begin with a scream, or a discovery, or even a disappearance. It begins with a garden. Behind a forgotten monastery in the limestone hills of Istria, a square of land was tended for centuries not by monks, but by the women who arrived in silence, stayed for a season, and left without farewell. The garden grew no fruit, no flowers, only root vegetables, thick and pale, grown in soil darkened with iron dust. Locals avoided the place. They called it the Garden of the Tongueless. It is said that no one ever spoke there. And yet, things were understood. One journal, recovered from a sealed cellar during renovations, belonged to a woman who referred to herself only as S. Her handwriting changed over time, first elegant, then trembling, then barely legibly, as if the act of remembering became heavier the more she wrote. "We do not eat to live," she wrote. "We eat to receive. What others bury we take in. What the world forgets we carry." Her final entry was a single line. "Today I will eat the last part of myself." The garden still exists, though nothing grows there now. The soil has hardened, like stone compacted by time. Samples taken from its center are chemically unstable. Instruments fail, hands tremble. One technician who held a clod of that soil described the sensation as being remembered by something older than language. This is not metaphor, this is not myth. This is the edge of something we were never meant to see. If the earth remembers all, then we who walk upon it, who bury our sorrow in it, who build our homes and dreams upon its surface are also remembered, not just in carbon and dust, but in grief, in ritual, in the taste we leave behind. And those women, those vessels of soil, they understood what we have forgotten, that the land absorbs everything and eventually it must speak. So now the question turns inward. What sorrow have you buried? What fragments of yourself have you hoped the soil would forget? And if the ground were to speak to you not with words, but through hunger, through memory, would you listen? Or would you kneel, silently, and take the first mouthful? It's not uncommon to hear stories of people disappearing, vanishing without a trace, leaving their loved ones and their everyday lives behind them. But sometimes the strangest disappearances are the ones that happen within plain sight. People can vanish right before your eyes and you never notice. You don't know what happened to them. You don't understand how it could have been possible. Those sorts of disappearances are the most terrifying because they suggest that anyone can vanish at any moment, anywhere, and no one will ever notice. There are various psychological explanations for these kinds of disappearances. Some missing persons suffer from fugue states, a kind of amnesia that causes you to travel while retaining your memories, effectively trapping you in your own past. Others simply experience a mental breakdown and attempt to start a new life somewhere else. But those aren't the only possibilities. Every once in a while, an unexplained disappearance happens right before your eyes, and even after all the evidence has been collected and examined, nobody knows what actually happened. Take the case of Maura Murray, a young woman whose car was found abandoned near a snowbank in New Hampshire in February 2004. Witnesses reported seeing her car skid off the road. But when police arrived at the scene, they found no sign of a crash. Days later, they found her abandoned vehicle and a pair of footprints in the snow leading away from the car and into the woods. But there was no sign of Maura. Her cell phone was found on the seat of the car with her purse and keys, but none of her belongings were ever recovered. Search parties combed the area for days, but they found no trace of Maura Murray. She was never seen again. In 2016, a man walking his dog spotted a set of human bones in a wooded area. He alerted authorities and a subsequent investigation revealed the bones to be Maura's. However, the cause of death was never determined and no one knows what happened to her. Even now, almost 20 years later, her case remains unsolved. Sometimes entire families seem to vanish without a trace. In 1964, 3 members of the Broberg family disappeared from their home in Idaho. The family home had been ransacked, but there was no sign of a struggle. Authorities immediately suspected that a serial killer known as the I-8 killer was responsible, but despite finding several pieces of evidence, they weren't able to make an arrest. Several months later, the FBI began investigating the case and learned that neighbors had witnessed suspicious activity on the day. The family vanished a year after the disappearance. The FBI arrested Eric Gross, a convicted sex offender, for the murders, but he was soon released due to lack of evidence. Years later, new DNA testing technology proved that the evidence against Gross was inconclusive. As of today, the case remains unsolved, but sometimes the most frightening disappearances are the ones that happen inside of our own homes. If you've ever woken up in the middle of the night and felt like you were being watched, then you probably just imagined it. But some people aren't so lucky. In 2011, a woman woke up in the middle of the night and saw a shadowy figure standing over the foot of her bed. At first, she assumed it was her husband, but when she turned on the bedside lamp, she realized that it was neither her husband nor anyone she recognized. It was a tall, thin man dressed in black. Startled, she screamed and the mysterious man disappeared. For several weeks after this incident, she woke up every night to find someone sitting on the foot of her bed. On the last occasion, she reached out to touch the man, but her hand went straight through him. Then he vanished. One day her son came home early and discovered that she had disappeared. Who can say exactly where and when we become ourselves? When does the story of I begin? And if you could wake up in the middle of your life and suddenly find yourself living your life differently, would you? Or would you try to find the point where your story diverged, trying to nudge it back onto the path it was supposed to follow? Or maybe you wouldn't care, realizing that your life has always been exactly how it was supposed to be. What if all of us were characters in a book and the author decided to change the plot? Could you accept it, or would you fight to maintain your narrative? Thank you for watching this special 5-part series. Do you have a story you'd like to share with us? Visit our website to submit your story and you may see it published on our channel.